Once again, God is amazing. Let's call Proverbs 29 sketches the end, as it's not the end of the chapter, but it seems like it may be the end of Solomon's contribution to the Proverbs. Like I said, it didn't literally give us titles like the Psalms sometimes do for David, but the next two chapters are going to be attributed, one to the words of Agur and the words of King Lemuel in chapter 31. But for this one, let's subtitle it really Beyond the End, Words, Rulers, and Reality. Understanding that those are three of the things that stood out to me from what might be the final Proverbs of Solomon, at least in the book of Proverbs. Well, with regard to words, it would only be fitting if we, I think, allowed some of these to just preach themselves. And that's what I'll do with the words passages that stood out to me, starting with verse 20 and going backwards. Do you see a man who is hasty in his words? There is more hope for a fool than for him. Mirror. Anyway, verse 11 will go on to say, a fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back. And hopefully I can put that one into more practice, because those are both sobering passages that don't necessarily need a whole lot of explanation if you've ever put your foot in your mouth. But likewise, we realize that each day we wake up, we have a new opportunity, and therefore, God willing, I guess one of the advantages to reading these out of sequence is that last one can give us a little bit of hope. But a wise man quietly holds it back, understanding we have the chance to grow past the days when we've given full vent to our spirit in a time when it was completely inappropriate. But the passages that have to deal with the king, we'll take a brief pause to maybe talk about those. We might just let those preach themselves as well. Let's see how it goes. Beginning in verse 2, when the righteous increase, the people rejoice. But when the wicked rule, the people groan. Take a brief pause to say, that's hard to sort out in a country like America, where no matter who's ruling, the people are groaning. Going on to verse 4. By justice a king builds up the land, but he who exacts gifts tears it down. We're going to let that one preach itself too. By verse 12, we'll realize, though, if a ruler listens to falsehood, all his officials will be wicked. Verse 14, going on to help us understand that if a king faithfully judges the poor, his throne will be established forever. With verse 26 helping us to understand that many seek the face of a ruler, but it is from the Lord that a man gets justice. And taking a moment to comment on that one being the last verse that I saw in the chapter, directly going to the wisdom of a king, it seems to give us more wisdom on our perspective toward the king. Understanding that there is only so much hope that we can reasonably put in people, no matter what position they hold, from the greatest to the least. This is reminding us that whoever is in the seat of justice, whether it is a judge or a king, they are a people with flaws. And ultimately, we disappoint ourselves if we look to a person for righteousness without regard to whether or not that person is closely tethered to God, the one who is actually giving justice. And understanding the wisdom that we have seen with regard to wise words and the ruler. Reality was the last thing I said that stood out to me, beginning in verse 1, where it reads, he who is often reproved, yet stiffens his neck, will suddenly be broken beyond healing. Reminding me also of what we see in verse 19, where it reads, by mere words, a servant is not disciplined, for though he understands, he will not respond. Really, those both could preach themselves, but they reminded me of an example of an illustration I might have used, but might have edited out of a previous video, where I went back and I looked at all these boxers after a recent fight where a great boxer who was in the conversation for the current pound for pound greatest in the world suddenly had his O removed by a very crushing defeat. And it took me back to another boxer who went by the nickname of the Crusher, who had grown super confident in his success to the point that many of the greatest fighters in the world did not even want to get in the ring with him. The flip side was he had a hard time finding trainers he would actually listen to. And so over time, his success began to cloud out the advice of those around him, and eventually he took a very crushing defeat. And it was a devastating enough defeat to remind me that verse 1 of chapter 29 is not just old wisdom, because boxing is a sport where one loss can change your entire career. And so as he continued to get in the ring, he continued to fight, but he was never the same. And so the man who was once so intimidating that no one wanted to get in the ring with him was now stepping in the ring, getting beaten by just about everyone, helping us to realize once again that the wisdom, presumably the wisdom of Solomon in verse 1, still speaks to us today. He who is often reproved, yet stiffens his neck, will suddenly be broken beyond healing. Which is why we sometimes say, my prayer for you is my prayer for me. May God find us to be, or at least make us to be, the kinds of servants that he can discipline with mere words.